Welcome to Legal Studies, and today we're going to be learning about the role of the media, including social media, in law reform. So where are we in our study design? Here we are down here on our third dot point. As I said, we're learning about how the media can influence law reform. It's a separate dot point to the previous area that we studied, but it's still covering the same sort of topic. We're still thinking about how can you as an individual get involved in the law reform process, either through using traditional media or social media. So when we're talking about media, it's important to make this distinction between traditional media, which is things like newspapers, magazines, televisions, radio, etc., all the things that existed before the internet, and what we call social media, which are all of the things that have come into existence after the internet, the ways in which individuals are able to connect to each other over the internet through websites, things like Twitter, TikTok, etc. And we use these different types of media in slightly different ways to try and influence law reform. So some examples of the role of traditional media in law reform, we can look at, for example, TV programs, which can be really hugely effective at influencing the government to change the law. We can see, for example, investigative journalist programs like Four Corners, which is famous for investigating areas of possible corruption or wrongdoing, exposing them in their television show, and that raises huge amounts of public awareness. The government becomes aware of it, and then all of a sudden there's this great pressure on the government to make some sort of positive change. So we can see here in this photo below, there was a program which aired exposing some really bad treatment of people in aged care homes. And that exposure in the TV program led to big calls for changes in the law, and it led to reforms in how aged care homes operate. As well, we've got this other example over here. Documentaries can act in a similar way, putting pressure on government by raising awareness of things like refugee rights and refugee issues and things like that, as we see in the photo. A problem, however, with our traditional media, at least in Australia, is that we have a really high concentration of ownership of traditional media. And what that means is we've got one or two people who own like 90% of all newspapers in Australia. Rupert Murdoch, for example, owns a massive percentage of all of our newspapers, and he has been publicly criticised. You can see some of his newspapers here. He has been publicly criticised for using his newspaper ownership to manipulate elections. So he's got a strong bias in favour of the Liberal Party, for example, and he uses his newspapers to slam the Labor Party, slam the Greens, especially leading up to election time, and he has been accused of using this to manipulate the results of elections. And so we might say that his voice has a disproportionate impact on the sorts of laws we pass because he's got so much power. Thinking now about social media, I've got a couple of examples here for you. The use of Twitter and the internet to connect people and to amplify their voice. We've got the hashtag #LetUsSpeak movement, which was a sort of law reform movement that sprung up organically on the internet and used Twitter to spread after Victoria passed some laws that silenced sexual assault victims. So sexual assault victims were not allowed to publicly tell their stories or reveal their names because of this law that Victoria had passed. Now, the law was intended to protect sexual assault victims by preventing them from being named in the media, protect their identities, but the law had accidentally also silenced victims themselves, even if they wanted to speak up. So this campaign, hashtag #LetUsSpeak, resulted in a lot of attention, and it resulted in the government changing its law and allowing sexual assault survivors to speak up if they wanted to. We've also got the Get Up website, which is a website for Australian people who want to connect together and fight a particular cause. It lets you create surveys and petitions and collect donations, and there's all sorts of causes up there all the time. So examples of ways in which social media has allowed people to get involved in making changes to the law. Now, finally, the main thing we really need to know for this topic, as always, is our strengths and weaknesses of how influential is the media at influencing law reform. Well, some strengths are the fact that the media can allow us to reach huge numbers of people, especially traditional media, with airing on the TV and newspapers and radio. All of those combined together can allow us to gather a huge amount of support. And we know the way Parliament works is that the more public support and the more public awareness there is for an issue, the more likely they are to feel that pressure and to make a change. Other strengths are the fact that particularly social media can be really easily accessible and affordable for regular people. And so anyone these days can use social media to try and create awareness for change. On the other hand, a corresponding weakness to that is that traditional media can be still really, really expensive. And only the most well-resourced individuals might be able to, run a TV ad, for example. And we also spoke about already the fact that, only a very small group of people, 2 or 3 people in Australia own the vast majority of all the newspapers. So their voice has more of a say than other people's voice. Another weakness is that because the media can often present lots and lots of different voices, lots and lots of different views, having a diversity of opinions on an issue might mean that Parliament doesn't know what the people actually think, and Parliament might decide to make no change because they're afraid of controversy, they're afraid of backlash from particularly vocal groups. On the other hand, raising awareness through social media or through traditional media can be one of the best ways to demonstrate to Parliament that there is support for a change. All right, particularly social media. When people are able to connect together, and if there's 1 million people tweeting about a topic, that can be a really strong sign for Parliament. That they need to make a change. And as well, all of our other methods of law reform in some way rely on the media to spread the word. So the media is essential in almost all methods of law reform. All right, and that's it for our strengths and weaknesses. I'll see you next time.